In Onshape, you can use variables to help build design intent into your models. Design intent is a way in which we add more intelligence to our models so that when one thing changes, other things update in ways that we planned for and in ways that we expect. Variables are also great for driving multiple features with a single value. To create a variable, you will go to this icon in the ribbon. I will click on it. This opens up a dialog box, and there are two major kinds of variables. There are assigned variables and measured variables. Let's take a look at some of the different assigned variable types first. And the first one that we have here is a length. So let's give it a name. Let's say I want a single variable to drive the values of my fillet radii. Well, let me create one. I'll call it fillet radius. And then for the value, let's say I want my standard radius to be a value of 0.25 inches. And if you want to, you can add in a description, like I could say this is my standard value. So this is good. I like everything in here. So I will hit the check mark. And now you can see in our feature list, we have our variable listed in here. But let's say I go to try to drive this particular fillet using this variable. I can right click on that feature and then choose edit. And so here we have our information. Right now it is a radius of 0.125 inches. In order to use a variable, you will use the hashtag or the pound sign. So let me go to Shift 3, which is the hashtag. And when I do that, I get this little list where it'll show me any existing variables that are in my feature list above this particular feature, or I could create a new variable on the fly. I don't have that fillet radius that I created because it appears after this feature in the feature list. Let me cancel out. I'm going to grab this fillet radius. I'm going to drag it above the features that I want to use it. So now I can go back to fillet 1, right mouse click and hold and choose edit. And now I will click on the radius. Let's enter the hashtag or pound sign. And now in the suggestions list, I have my fillet radius. So I will choose that, and you can see that this is the radius value. I will hit the check mark, and the fillet radius updates appropriately. Let me go to fillet 2. I want this to be driven with my standard radius as well. So I will right mouse click and choose edit. And then once again, let's go to the radius value and then use a hashtag and choose our fillet radius and then hit the check mark. And that fillet updates as well. So we have everything being driven by this value. Let's take a look at another kind that we can use. This model has a bunch of draft features in it. And so I'm going to use the rollback bar this time to move up above the draft features. And now let's go create our new variable. And I will change the type to angle. And for the name of it, this is going to be my draft angle. So let's call that draft angle. Oops, can I spell today? And then for my standard value, I want this to be, let's say, 2 degrees. And I'm not going to fill in a description. That is an optional value. So let's hit the check mark in order to create this. And so I'm getting an error because I used a space in the name of the variable. So let's right mouse click on this and then choose edit. And let's change this so that we don't have an illegal character in here. Let me put in the ampersand, or excuse me, the underscore instead. And then I can use the check mark. And that way we have fixed the name of the variable. And so now I can exit out of the rollback mode. Let me roll to the end. Now I can go to draft 1, right mouse click and hold and choose the edit command. And here we have our draft angle. Right now it's using 3 degrees. So I will click on that and then let's use the pound sign once more. And let's use our draft angle. You'll notice that it doesn't list the fillet radius because it is not an appropriate type of variable there, because that one was for a length. So let's choose draft angle and then hit the check mark, and so the model updates. And let's do that for draft 2 as well. Right mouse click and hold, and let's choose the edit command, and then use the pound sign, and then choose our draft angle and hit the check mark. And so that feature updates as well. Okay, for the next kind, let's go to our variable command. And the third one in the list here is for a number. And this is great for controlling patterns. So for example, maybe I want the number of holes to be a different value here. So let's call this, I'll call this number holes. And let's change this to a value of 6. And once again, I'm going to forego entering a description because, again, that is optional. Now we'll grab this number of holes and drag it above where I want to use it. And so let's go to our circular pattern, right mouse click and hold, and let's go to the edit command. And we'll change the instance count here using the pound sign, number of holes, and then hit the check mark. This updates to 6 holes. There is a mirror of the feature on the back, so that one updated as well. And then there is another type in here, and I don't have a good example in this part. Let me go to variable, and here we have assigned. And this is any. And there's a lot that you can do with any. The any kind applies to anything that has a length, an angle, or number. Or maybe you want to use a length with a different unit than what we have in our worksheet. So for example, this worksheet is in inches. I could use length with a meter unit or a millimeter unit. But anyhow, let's say that I want one for capturing the name of the person who's working on this model. And I'll call this the designer. And then tab to the value. If you want to use a string, in other words, if you want to use text, you're going to use the quotation. I'll put in my name, Dave, and then quotation, and then hit the check mark. And so now I've got a new type of variable here of that any type. All right, so now let's go to some of the different measure types. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn on the display of one of my planes. And so for one of my draft features, I've got this plane here. In this plane, if I go to the edit command, it is using a numerical value that happens to be the right value for the distance from the bottom surface to the center of the cylinder. But if I ever change one of my early sketches, then this won't update appropriately. So I want to make sure that the location of the neutral plane for my draft feature updates the way that it should. So I actually want to do a measurement. Let me cancel out of the plane dialog box. Let's go to our variable command. And let's change to the type measured. I'm going to measure a distance. And I want to measure the distance between, let's say, this surface. And then let's pick the cylinder. And so it's got the face of the extrude. I'm going to check the box to use the axis. Let's give a name for this. And let's call this the bottom to cylinder. And so this is going to have a value of 1.375, which is the same value that was manually entered in. But again, this helps build design intent. So let's hit the check mark. And I want to use this measurement to drive this feature. So let me drag this up above it. Now let me go to the draft neutral plane and then right mouse click and hold and choose edit. Let's change this offset distance. I will use the pound sign, and let's use our distance value. Then hit the check mark. And so now we have our location of this plane being driven by a measurement. There are a couple other different kinds of measurements. Let's go to variable and then measured. There's this one here for length, and for the length, you can pick, for example, different edges. If I want to pick, say, this edge here and give it a name, let's call this the cylinder circumference. And so this is going to have a value, and this would actually be equal to what, pi times the diameter of the cylinder there. So that's how you can use this one. And I don't really have a use for this one in this particular model, but let's take a look at another example. Let me hide that plane for a second. Where is that plane? There it is. Let me hide that plane. And so maybe I want these mounting holes to always be half the size of this diameter, so we can perform a measurement. Let's go to our variable and then go to measured and then diameter and select this cylindrical surface. Note that there is a box where you could measure the radius instead, and I'm going to call this the main hole. And so it's got a value of 1.25 inches. Let me hit the check mark. And I want to use this to drive these different features. So let me grab this and drag it all the way up here. And now I can go to extrude 3. Actually, it's going to drive this one. Let me go to the sketch. And now I'm going to go to the sketch, right mouse click and hold and choose edit, and let me view normal to my sketch plane. And so I want this dimension to be half of that measured diameter. So let me click on the dimension, double click to change its value, and then I'll do the pound sign, and here it shows the variables that are available to me, or I could create a new variable on the fly. And I'll choose main hole, but then I'm going to enter in an expression. Let's have this be divided by 2. And I'll hit the enter key. And you'll notice next to this particular value, it's got an f of x. If I just entered in a mathematical expression, like let's say I entered in 1 divided by 2, there would just be an f. But since I'm using a variable in that expression, it has fx next to this particular dimension. So that is good. I will hit the check mark, and now we have the size of these diameters being driven by this particular diameter in the model. And so part of the point of this is to show how we can make changes to our models by changing the variables. So for example, here I have my draft angle. Let me edit this, and I'm going to change this from 2 degrees. Let's change it to 1 degree. And it's not going to be much of a change, but I'll hit the check mark and it changed it a little bit. Let's try something more severe for that draft angle. Let's edit it and try using a value of 5 degrees instead. And again, it's the draft on this surface and the draft on the vertical side surfaces that are being driven by these. And let me hit the check mark in order to update these. And so then it put in the 5 degrees of draft. Same thing with the fillet radius. So right now we have the fillet radius, and it's using a standard value of 1/4 inch. Let me right mouse click on it and choose the edit command. And let's make it half that value, 0.125. And so the fillets update. Let's change it once more. Let's go to the edit command and change this to a value of let's try 375. And then hit the check mark. And so the standard fillets increase their size as well. So that's how you can show that we are driving multiple features using those different values. And you can also check to see what features are being driven by a particular variable. For example, I have this one here for the number of holes. I can select it and then right mouse click and choose Show Dependencies. And this opens up a dialog box. So this is showing that we have a circular pattern and a mirror that's being driven by this particular variable. And we can also go to another one. Let's go to our draft angle, right mouse click and hold and choose the show dependencies command, we can see the features that are being driven by this. So there you have it. That's how you can use variables for building design intent into your models in Onshape.